This is The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry with the book's author, Dr. David Harrison, and me, your host, Elena Llamas. Dr. David Harrison is a UK-based Masonic historian who has so far written 8 books on the history of Freemasonry and 1 book related to Freemasonry, and has contributed articles on the subject to numerous publications and magazines around the world, such as Freemasonry Today, MQ Magazine, Knight Templar Magazine, The Square Magazine, Philalethes, and New Dawn Magazine. Harrison has appeared on television and radio discussing his work. His books are Genesis of Freemasonry, The Transformation of Freemasonry, The City of York, A Masonic Guide, The York Grand Lodge, A Quick Guide to Freemasonry, Freemasonry and Fraternal Societies, which he co-authored with Fred Lomax, The Liverpool Masonic Rebellion and the Wigan Grand Lodge, Christopher Rawdon, The Lost Philanthropist, and The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry, which is the book that we will be discussing today. Dr. Harrison obtained his PhD from the University of Liverpool in 2008, which focused on the development of English Freemasonry. His thesis was subsequently published in 2009 as the book The Genesis of Freemasonry, which I have displayed right here and have read and enjoyed greatly. Let's talk about The Lost Rites and Rituals of Freemasonry. This is your new book that just came out this year.
Yeah, been a great book to research.
Well, let's talk about the cover design. Did you design the cover of the book, and do you have it there for to show to the camera?
Oh yeah, so
right. I see Uriel, Raphael. What are the names? Gabriel.
Uriel, Raphael, Michael, and Gabriel. Yeah.
And why those names? What is the design?
And well, the symbol really was we wanted something that was going to represent not just one of the rites, but maybe a lot of the rites that we're discussing. Because chapter 1 opens up with a lot of the 18th century rites that were taking place during the period of Enlightenment, and they were represented by many different symbols and things like that. I was asked to look at designing a load of different symbols, you know, from all kinds of weird, strange places that would represent many of the rites, really. I drew a number of them, had a load of these drawings just knocking around, and decided to give those out with the pre-orders. It was about 20 or so they soon ran out, and then after that I printed out the symbol, so we're giving away signed prints of the symbol, and I passed up my design over to the graphic designer, and he settled on that. He came up with that. So there's a lot of different merging symbols there, and merging beliefs as well, which is what the book's all about. So, we designed that. We didn't give it a name until we sent it off to the publishers, and they decided to file it under the name of Light. Really pleased with the cover. So,
what inspired you to research these rites?
Well, it's something that I've only touched on before in the books that I've written, which were mainly about English Freemasonry. So I really kind of started to get interested in the rites of the continent that were happening in France and Germany, Russia, places like that during the 18th century. They really started to capture my attention. It's very hard as an academic to discuss stuff like that, because you know there's no records. You're just interviewing people basically, and you're looking to be passed bits and pieces. This book is a history book, and it's looking at the lost rites in the 18th century and occult revival and other things. So yeah.
The book has a foreword by Arturo de Hoyos, a prominent Mason here in the United States. And can you explain the difference between a rite and a ritual?
A rite and a ritual. Well, the rite collects the degrees, you know. So I think
like the Scottish rite would be the collection of all the degrees.
That's right. I think Arturo said it best in his introduction. He said the degree or the ritual is like one stair, and the rite is like the staircase, you know. So that's the way that he put it, which I thought was fantastic.
The collection. The titles of some of these grades or degrees are beautiful. From the early Rite chapter of Claremont, founded in France in 1754 and only lasting about 4 years, which has a Templar theme, we have Knight of the Eagle, Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, Sublime Master and Knight of God. From the Rite of Philalethes, Knight of the East, Knight of the Temple, Unknown Philosopher, Sublime Philosopher.
You read it?
Yes, I have, and I wrote down some of these names because I found them fascinating. I'm just going to mention some. The Order of the Palladium, founded in Paris in 1737. Order of the Amazons, founded in South America in 1740. Order of the Syrophagists, founded in Italy in 1748. Order of the African Architects. The Rite of the Sublime Elects of Truth, the Rite Escocese Philosophique, Rite of the Black Eagle, Persian Rite, Order of Jerusalem. You can see there's no lack of inspiration, of flair. They are very colorful rites. How did Enlightenment ideas and ideals influence the creation of all these rites?
Well, the period of Enlightenment was really fever pitch, during this time, and especially in France and in places like Germany as well, Russia, where these centres of culture, these educated men really wanted to, and women as well. They could take part in a version of Freemasonry that wasn't restricted. In England at the time, we just had, the 3 degrees with the Royal Arch. At the time these rites were exploding in the continent. In England, we had three grand lodges that were arguing with each other. The ancients, the moderns, the York. They all had different ways of doing things. There was this big debate over the Royal Arch. Was it a 4th degree like the ancients wanted it to be, or practiced it to be? And then the moderns were saying, oh no, it's just a little add-on to the 3rd that completes the 3rd. And so there's all this arguing going on, really. And in England, and it was sort of restricted, but in the continent, it kind of exploded. There was, people could come along like Count Cagliostro and say, oh, I've got this fantastic rite, the Egyptian rite, do you want to check it out? And then you had von Hund, Baron von Hund, who did the rite of strict observance, and there was a lot of people coming along on the scene, the Masonic scene, creating these rites, that were maybe 7 degrees, sometimes 9 degrees. And it was a journey. It wasn't just the 3 degrees of Masonry, but it was an esoteric journey where they could delve into Freemasonry and soak up the knowledge, which is what the Enlightenment was all about, discovering lost knowledge. So these rites they offered a pathway to the search for lost knowledge, and so it was like going back to what our Chura de Hoya said about the staircase, 1 step, and it was like climbing the stairs, and at the very top you discover the lost knowledge of the ancients, so that's what it was all about.
Well, let's talk about some of these charismatic characters that were forming these new rites. We have Saint Martin, and he became known as the Unknown Philosopher. And he also practiced alchemy in his own laboratory. We have Pappus. He revived, he fused the Rite of Mizraim and the Rite of Memphis, you're right, creating a rite of 99 degrees. And this one is still practiced today. What's that?
99 degrees, yeah, that's right.
And this one is still around.
It's still, not seen as regular. But it's still very, very popular. I've met a lot of French Freemasons and Freemasons from all over, really, the continent that are really into Memphis Mizrahi. It seems to go hand in hand now with things like Martinism and other orders like that. But it's 99 degrees.
I've heard of some in the United States. I've never met anybody, but I've heard of them. You mentioned Cagliostro. We have Pasquale, Melissino. The book is full of characters and rites, and it is very colorful. Where you don't know what's history, you don't know what's fantasy. They have grown into characters of mythical proportions, and so the book, it's a very rich window into the times in Freemasonry in the context of that society, right? And you mentioned regularity today. So how is it that these Masonic influenced rites flourish so much? Where these three Grand Lodges in England at the time, York, the Ancients and Moderns, not as concerned as they are today with regularity and the coming up of new rites, or was this so novel that it took a while for the Grand Lodge to realize that there was an issue with regularity and irregularity?
Well, I mean, the term regularity has obviously changed over time. I mean, when you go back to the 18th century, you've got three Grand Lodges in England. One of the things that I pointed out in my York Grand Lodge book is that people could interact between York lodges and modern lodges and indeed ancient lodges. And I managed to research certain lodges where this was evident, where some Freemasons were forming a York lodge. There was one in called the Lodge of Fortitude in Oldham in Manchester, which is just down the road from me now. And this guy came over from York, settled in Manchester, recruited a load of Freemasons from a modern lodge, and created another York lodge. And then when the York lodge fizzled out, they all kind of went back to the modern lodge, and some went to the ancient lodge, and so there was swapping and changing. Even my lodge, the Lodge of Lights, which is based in Warrington, which was founded in 1765.
Wow.
They were a modern lodge, but they received members from the ancients. So
interesting. So they were as you were saying today, there are Freemasons who are in these irregular orders, but even back then, among the three Grand Lodges, there were co-membership. So tell us about your lodge, the Lodge of Lights. Is that Ashmole's, Elias Ashmole's lodge?
I think they'd like to believe that. I don't know. They were founded in 1765. They were a modern lodge. We don't really know where the founders came from. There's always this hazy thing in the 18th century. These founders suddenly pop up somewhere, and they were obviously Masons beforehand. Mm-hmm. But because the records are a bit sparse in those days, we don't know where they came from. And I've done some research on them. They all seem to be Warringtonians. They all seem to be based here, working here.
So for people watching who are not familiar with the ancient and modern split, can you very briefly tell us what was the difference in belief, or why weren't they together?
Well, the ancients were formed in 1751, and they created their own Grand Lodge, effectively. I suppose these days it'd be termed either as an independent Grand Lodge or a clandestine Grand Lodge, or bogus. This Grand Lodge, they formed and said, right, we're doing it this way, and they were going back to at the time that they were stating that they were fed up with the way the moderns, as they termed themselves, as they termed the Premier Grand Lodge, the one that was founded in 1717. Which
everybody's celebrating this year, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
they reckoned that the moderns were, well, becoming too modern. They were altering things, the administration, and the ancients wanted to take it back. So you had travelling lodges and things like this, and the ancients had a way of moving a lodge from town to town, quite easily. The administration seemed to be a lot easier. Warrants, they could sell warrants as well. Say a lodge became defunct, closed, they could then sell the warrants onto another lodge. So it's quite flexible, really. Where the moderns were quite restrained, and they had this other format, really, But it wasn't long before you get ancient masons popping into modern lodges and vice versa.
So did any of these lost rites and rituals come to the United States?
You had John Yaka, for example, who was English. Again, he was from Manchester, just down the road. He went to America and got involved in the Swedenborgian rite over there, and then brought that back to England, and then the Memphis Mizraim stuff that he got involved in, he brought that over to England as well, and basically modernised it.
Yeah, what really caught my attention in that vein was from the Rite of Perfection and the Order of the Royal Secret, Deputy Grand Inspector General Franken traveled to New York and established the rite there in 1763, and from there, the order went on to be founded in South Carolina, which ultimately led to the establishment of the Scottish Rite there in 1801. The Scottish Rite becoming one of the most well-known and enduring rites that is still practiced today. I found that really fascinating. So this Rite of Perfection in the Order of the Royal Secret, that this is one of those that didn't get revived?
Well, it didn't need to, because it suddenly kind of went from the continent over to the States, and became one of the most successful rites ever, the Scottish Rite,
so
3 degrees. So that was one that obviously found success, and then from America it got transplanted back over to the continent and back into England as well. So became a very well structured, well ordered administration that was quite easy to manage, quite attractive as well. In fact, when I went over to Belgium, the Scottish Rite got reintroduced there in the early 1800s, and became really successful, and
wow.
Which was fascinating, really, because it's gone over to the Atlantic and just come back again, but it's been perfected in a way. It's been revitalized and recreated in a way. Because originally it was only, I think, 25 degrees. We have the Franken manuscripts, that reveal that, and then obviously it kind of shaped up and was reformed and recreated.
Was there a backlash to all this ritual and rite creating? You write that there was a reaction to bring Freemasonry back to the significance of craft degrees, a reaction that was seen. The high grade Freemasonry was seen as pretentious and overdone. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was a bit of a reaction against it, really. I think when I talk about the English side of things, because the book is actually 2 books in one. I don't know if you've noticed, but
yes.
Part 1 and Part 2, and the Part 2 is all the English stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons was that the publisher reminded me that I've got to put a bit more English stuff in.
Reminded you that you're English.
You're English, Dave. Remember that. So I thought, well, that's good, because at the time I was looking at the rites that were available in England, and you got rites like the Rite of 7 degrees, which obviously had 7 degrees, and the Baldwin Rite, and the Baldwin Rite is still going. And that's completely compatible with UGLE.
Well, as a reader, I would say that I appreciated the two parts, because the first part is all over the continent and even the United States, like we were talking about, and all these really rather unfamiliar, obscure sounding rites and rituals, along with some better known ones, and then you bring it down to the history of the union of Grand Lodges in the UK, and given that UGLE is so influential to the rest of the regular world, it did ground it in the sense of, okay, historically. So I appreciated the two parts together, because the first part, I mean, these rites were really all over the place and flourishing. And some of the details are really, well, to me, I found it a bit shocking, especially the... Yes, I was. This was really happening outside of Freemasonry and within Freemasonry. And that, to me, it's important to see its context, because Freemasons are not today, or are they, David, doing such ceremonies with wax and invoking archangels?
But that's the whole thing, you see, because with the occult revival, which Arthur Edward Waite was obviously a part of, and John Yaka and William Quilliam and all these other people, Hockley and Frederick Hockley and George Irwin, and there was still this desire for the search for lost knowledge, and they were looking back at the lost rites, thinking, "Oh, is this the way to do it?" You know, to really get in touch with the angels, the archangels. So this was their desire, really.
You mentioned Mark Twain, also a Freemason, also had an interest in this, and you mentioned Arthur Conan Doyle.
These were really intelligent people. And like Frederick Hockley was a Grand Lodge officer, you know, in the United Grand Lodge of England. Irwin was very well respected. Behind Ashmole, I mean, he was you know, one of the founders of the Royal Society. You know, he's a very intellectual, historical, well-respected figure. You know, who was obviously into Freemasonry and into alchemy and all kinds of other things.
As a whole, after the 3 degrees were established, the craft degrees were established, you write that there was a need, a desire for more, for exploring more of the themes within Freemasonry, and so all this rite and ritual writing and practicing really, as a whole, you know, as somebody who's read your book, I get the sense it's much more in mystical in that sense, of seeking a direct experience. Not that the 3 craft degrees weren't providing a direct experience, but it's definitely of a different kind.
Right about that. When I was writing the book, and I got part 1 and part 2, there was an obvious bridge there, because John Yaka, he was involved in searching for all these different old rituals. English rituals, and there was one particular ritual that he found in my lodge back in 1865. So there's a connection there, personal connection, if you like, you know, with the lodge. And he discovered what's called the Lancashire rituals, which is where I am, in Lancashire. But he obviously was mentioned in part 1 as a cult revivalist, and who was into the Memphis Mizraim and Swedenborgian. So that was a nice bridge to the English stuff, because in part 2 I go directly into this ritual called the Lancashire rituals that Yaka copied. That was a fantastic chapter for me to do, because obviously it was to do with my lodge as well. But apart from that, it's this old series of lectures from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degrees, and it's very Christian in flavour. So it's pre-Union, dated to the late 1700s, and it was fascinating to do, because there's all these Christian things in there. There's mentions of biblical characters, feminine characters as well. Ruth is mentioned, and so it gives this pre-union flavour really. So that led me on to do a chapter on the lost archaic symbols of the pre-union England, and then all these other rituals that have sprouted up that are in essence there's a threat of them dying out, because the way Freemasonry is at the moment, there's a lot of lodge closures in England, all lodge mergers, and some of them do their own rituals, which you probably come on to in a bit, but so yeah, all kind of fits together nicely, really.
So when you say union, the Union of 1813, which Grand Lodges got together?
It was the moderns and the ancients, and they basically, had a series of talks, and at the time, what's interesting, round about that kind of period, the early 19th century, is that Freemasonry was suffering then as well. It was kind of experiencing something similar to what it's experiencing now. It was reflecting the social changes. There was some drastic social changes. A lot of lodges were closing. There was a lot of surviving lodges that were in financial trouble or only had a few members. Like my lodge, the Lodge of Lights at the time, only had about 10, 12 members.
Wow.
Turning up, and there were certain years where it was really low. They were really in difficulty, and I've written a book about this, the transformation of Freemasonry, which examines all of those troubles that were going on. This is where we get the Liverpool Masonic Rebellion and all this kind of stuff. The York Grand Lodge basically dies out, and that disappears. So you get the ancients and moderns coming together in 1813. So
before, let's talk about some of those drastic changes. Before the Union of 1813, Freemasonry was localized, right? You're right. What do you mean? Was there more diversity in ritual? What drastic changes did this union bring about?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to imagine that in the 18th century, there's no trains the railways didn't come out until the 1830s, so the early 1830s. So it took a week to get from where I live to go to London, So things were slower then, really, in terms of travel and connecting together, communication. So you do have a lot of lodges that have their own way of doing things, really. They have their own system, their own ritual, their own version of the ritual, if you like.
And one of the ways in which this union sought to standardize, if I may use that term, was that I found very interesting. You write that there was a Lodge of Reconciliation set up to standardize the varied rituals that had been worked throughout the country under the ancient and modern Grand Lodges, and to deal with any disputes that arose. And also an Emulation Lodge of Improvement was set up in 1823 at Freemasons Hall in London, enabling the authentic ritual, which was decided was the authentic ritual, to be practiced and learned accurately without alteration. In some lodges sent delegations to London to learn the ritual and bring it back to their lodges, right? But not all of them, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is where you get the Liverpool Masonic Rebellion, because certain amount of lodges, again in Lancashire, in Liverpool, and Wigan, just down the road again, they decided that, there's all these changes that are being imposed and we don't like it.
Yeah, it's almost asking for a rebellion, right? At that time, you can imagine if they had their local costumes and rituals, and suddenly this is really, really getting standardized. But it wasn't complete. Well, there were rebellions, which you have written about in other works, and then something gave a little, right? Because today you have variety in ritual. Can you talk about how it is today as a result of all this?
Well, one of the reactions to the rebellion was that United Grand Lodge decided to give lodges a little leeway, and say, well, you can do, what you want to do, you can alter it, but it's got to be within, the certain set standard, but we'll allow you a bit of freedom to do what you want, So hence from that kind of period, which is the mid 19th century, you start getting all these other rituals popping up, like the bottomley ritual, which is mainly in the Liverpool area. You get all kinds of other ones. There's Taylor's ritual. Taylor's was basically one of the early books that was printed, because they didn't officially put the ritual in print, the United Grand Lodge of England, I think up until 1969, I think it was. So there was no official version. So people had to learn it and then go back to their own lodge.
And there was no official version. Why? Why? Because weren't they supposed to memorize this stuff, or why weren't they just printing it?
I mean, I'm terrible at learning ritual. I mean, you get all these big pieces, and it's terrible. And you can imagine what these people are doing.
No,
they had to learn it. They had to, word by word, piece by piece, and then go back to their own lodge. And then say, this is the new way of doing it. And memories start to get faulty, and you mentioned there's dialects involved, and so you start getting variations. What's that? Different words, like they've probably seen it done maybe a few times, and it's like, well, I've forgotten exactly what they do there. But we'll tell you what, we'll do it. Well,
I'll mention this because I know that our U.S. audience will find it very interesting. Today, you write there's around 50 different established craft rituals or workings throughout England and Wales, and if you include the workings of individual lodges, there are countless variations. The more common ones include logic, stability, universal, the Veritas working, the Merchant Navy working, and Claret's working. So these different workings are people in these localized craft ways of doing things defensive and protective of their own ways.
Oh yeah. I mean, even today, I mean, I used to be in a lodge in Liverpool that did bottomley ritual, and then I moved to the Lodge of Lights, which does their own ritual. It's kind of emulation, but with a few things added out and little different perambulations that are quite strange and unique, to that particular lodge. So I keep on remembering my bottomley stuff, and so I'm always getting moaned at, in my lodge. You said that wrong. What's that? Well, that's bottomley. So I'm getting it all mixed up. It's like, oh no, that's not how we do it in this lodge, So you get all of that going on, and but the beautiful thing is that you can go to different lodges and see things performed different ways, and it may only be the perambulations are different, or there's certain lines that are given to somebody else, or there's different ways of saying it, there's different ways of doing it, and it makes it more entertaining. So all these different rituals, even though they are within the boundaries of emulation, they are different to different lodges, and there are so many different variations.
Excellent.
It's amazing to see,
I would like to mention too that in this part 2, you mentioned other changes after the Union of 1813, such as what happens to Christian themes. You talk about table lodges and specific symbols that were modified, in some cases introduced or disused.
I wanted to obviously do an English section to the book as well, which enabled me to look at the rites of 7 degrees, the Baldwin rite, and a few other things as well, the Lancashire rituals, and all these kind of strange, isolated, local rituals as well, but also one of the things with the rituals that are still going on today. So they're not officially lost as yet, but the way that I put it forward is that, well, they could very well be lost soon, because lodges are closing. And I've visited a lodge, it was the other week, and they used to do the Richard Carlisle ritual. Richard Carlisle was a radical of the early 19th century, and he was at the Peterloo massacre in Manchester, and he ended up in prison, for various radical things, but one of the things that he did do was he did an expose of the Masonic ritual, and it's a fantastic book. And because the United Grand Lodge didn't put theirs into print, Richard Carlisle's ritual was very popular. And I visited one particular lodge in Birkenhead called Zeppelin Lodge, and they used to work the Richard Carlisle ritual. But over the past few years, they've actually updated it. They've changed a lot of the archaic words in there, and again, there's people come from other lodges and put their bits in, and they've actually rewritten it.
So his expose was a manual of Freemasonry?
The Manual of Freemasonry. It was 1825.
Okay, so 1825, Carlisle writes the expose, which containing the ritual in there, and officially the ritual wasn't published until 1969. So between those two time periods, was his manual being used by Freemasons too? I imagine this expose is what it sounds like. It's an expose we're going to expose for the public and everybody to read. But where Freemasons, we were talking about, you had to memorize everything because it wasn't written down. So were they checking out the expose to?
Oh yeah, well they used it. Yeah, this particular lodge called Zeppelin Lodge, which was founded in I think it was about 1849, just going off memory. But they actually used the Richard Carlisle book, the manual,
just as a ritual book.
yeah, that's right. And so that became their ritual. And it was only recently that I'd say in the past 10 years or so that some Masons from other lodges have come in and they've actually looked at the ritual book and modernised it for the new members. And so they're not using the actual big, heavy, hardback ritual. They've obviously printed it now. The age of computers, they've retyped it up. They found, I was talking to one of their old DCs, Director of Ceremonies, and he said that he replaced a lot of the old archaic words that are still in the old manual, and they modernised them, really. So the ritual that they're using now is not exactly the Richard Carlisle ritual. It's kind of morphed, if you like. It's transformed into a modern, stranger version of it.
Right. Very interesting.
So this is how these rituals die out. They'll get replaced, and it changes all the time. And that's one of the themes with Freemasonry. It does change,
Right. Which is one of the I think for anybody who thinks that Freemasonry has been very stable and not innovative from A to B to C, I recommend that they read this book, because there has been a lot of changes that you explain and a lot of innovation here. And
things that change. Yeah. There's a chapter on lost symbolism there. Things like the beehive, and in England in particular. I think we've covered everything.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much, and I hope our viewers enjoyed it. And thank you, David.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.